Weldon, how are you?
I'm good, Joe. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing really well, really well.
Good to see you.
As you can probably tell from all my posts about you, I'm excited. I'm excited to have this time. I really thank you in advance.
Hey, I appreciate that. It's pretty flattering for an old guy.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm no Larry King, but hopefully we can extract some great value out of this because I know you have it, and it's my job to bring it. But we've been give a few seconds here for some people that will join live. Obviously, this will replay as well through the YouTube channel. Yeah, this is going to be fun. This is going to be fun. Even us just chatting for the first few minutes before we came on here, it's like, oh man, I could do this all day. So,
well, I'm a big fan of your work as well, and a great thing you're contributing to the industry. This group, the information that you share, you've made the point that you do it. It really is a labor of love for you, and sharing information, making a contribution. I remember on my first book you had mentioned before we got started today, The Upside of Fear, and I remember one of the coolest moments. We got two really big endorsements in that book. The first one was Tony Robbins. The second was Stephen Covey. But Tony Robbins' endorsement was, congratulations on your turnaround from prison to contribution. He didn't say from prison, to a Ferrari. He said from prison to contribution. And it just really stressed that people at that level, how important contribution is. The older I've got, I turned 60 this year. The older I've gotten, the more I understand how important that contribution is. And that's really what you're doing, is making a significant contribution to a lot of folks that can use it, man. We can all use it.
Man, that's the nicest thing I've heard ever said about me, I think. I love it. I'm serious. That's awesome. You hit on a couple of things. I before we even dive in to, I just know all the value that you can bring to everybody that gets to watch us, whether it's live or after the fact. But if you don't mind, I always like everybody to, obviously, for people that don't know who Weldon Long is, if you'd like, but really for you, I'd love to give you the stage to kind of bring people up to speed, as you just mentioned with Tony Robbins saying from prison to contribution. Yeah. People are probably going, what?
Yeah.
So the floor is yours, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So, I always like to start at where we are and then go back. I've residential contracting expert, been doing it for a couple of decades. I've built 6 or 7 of my own contracting companies. I've helped hundreds of others build and grow, some to sell, some to keep running, whatever. A big part of my work now is helping companies prepare to sell, right, to get the numbers right so you can get the maximum amount of money. I've got a contracting company myself now still, actually own 3 or 4 right now, I guess, and working on a couple more that we've recently acquired. And so I've really had a lot of success in the residential contracting industry, but my story really starts back many years before that. In 1987, in the years from 1987 until 2003, roughly 16 years, from the time I was 23 to the time I was 39, I spent 13 years in federal and state prisons. I was a 9th grade high school dropout. I was a punk and a thug, thought I knew everything at 14, 15, 16 years old. At 23 years old, I pull a gun on a guy, was quickly apprehended and sentenced to penitentiary for 10 years at 23 years old. And, was a really scared kid. We went down to Canyon City, Colorado here in that first trip to a 100-year-old prison. And they really got my attention. But at 27, I did about 4.5 years, got out, and I'm 27 years old now, still a high school dropout, still a punk and a thug. But now I'm a convicted felon. And what really happened, Joe, at that point, looking back now, 40 years later, looking back at what happened, I took a very dangerous step during those 4.5 years in prison the first time. And that is, I began to define myself as that guy. The guy who's a loser, a guy goes to prison, you start thinking in your early 20s, well, I guess this was my destiny, And so getting out of prison, not having many opportunities as a convicted felon, high school dropout, I made it about 2 years on the streets and ended up going back to prison a second time for gun charges and parole violations. Went back for a couple of years, got lucky, didn't get much time, got out again. Now I'm 30 years old. So all my 20s pretty much gave up to the State Department of Corrections here in Colorado and got out at 30 years old. Now I'm a 2-time convicted felon, still an idiot, still a punk, still a 9th grade high school dropout, and fell into some shady telemarketing stuff with some guys I met out of Las Vegas. Did that for a couple of years, made a ton of money until the feds walked in one day and we were all indicted on federal money laundering and mail fraud charges. So at 32 years old in 1996, I went back to the joint for the third time, this time to the federal joint for about 7 years. And but it was during that last 7 years that the worm turned, as they say. And I know exactly when it was. It was on June 10th of 1996. I was just beginning that 7-year stint. And one of the cops walked in the cell house one day and told me that my father had died, which was very unexpected. He was 59 years old. And suddenly I was confronted with the reality of all my life, all my bullshit, all my excuses, all my blaming others. And I don't know exactly why it happened, but I was very fortunate that I saw myself for what I really and truly was, really for the first time in my life. I was 32 years old, and so 28 years ago, it's hard to believe. But I saw myself for what I really and truly was. I had a 3-year-old son that I had fathered out on parole, and I had abandoned him. Obviously, it disappointed my father. My father went to his grave knowing me as a punk and a thief and a crook and a liar. And so after some real soul searching and some digging down deep, I made a decision in 1996. I was going to change the course of my life. And I didn't know where to start. I was a 9th grade high school dropout, 3-time convicted felon, 32-year-old loser. Like, where do you turn the Titanic of that life around, And so I did the only thing I could think to do, and that was to start reading. I started reading books and trying to find out what do really successful people do. And then let's try that, next time. And so that's what I did. I spent the next 7 years, and I didn't just study business, spent a lot of time studying the mindset and how our thoughts impact our lives. But dude, I got basic. I studied how to write. I took a basic grammar course. I studied history. I studied philosophy. I educated myself, And 7 years later, with a new mindset, I walked out of the penitentiary. That was in January of 2003 to a homeless shelter. And within 5 years, I had built an Inc. 5000 HVAC company, went from $0 to $20 million. I got a job in 2003 while I was still in the shelter selling as an HVAC comfort advisor. I learned the business. A year later, opened my own company. 5 years later, that company had grown from $0 to 20 million, sold that company. And by then had already started my first book I wrote in 2009, started traveling, speaking, helping other contractors, got picked up by a couple of big manufacturers, was doing a ton of work for those guys. A few years later, my second book comes out, The Power of Consistency, which is all about the mindset, which is the critical thing. That book becomes a New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestseller. Third book, Consistency Selling, was Amazon sales #1 bestseller. And the last 15 years, man, just running, teaching, speaking, consulting. I always keep a foot in the contracting industry. I've got a company here in Colorado Springs. I started 5 years ago, and we just had our 5th anniversary, and we sold just over $42 million of residential HVAC systems in 5 years from scratch. We didn't buy a company. We started a company from scratch. Since then, I've acquired several others. I've bought and sell and, buying companies, build them up, sell them, that whole thing. And it's just been an only in America story, as I like to say, because anywhere else it would have strung my ass up and I'd have been done for a long time ago. But this is a country, the land of opportunity for whatever our shortcomings are. And there are shortcomings for sure, but it's still the best place on earth to be. And it's a country that's actually, this industry is very forgiving, very generous. This industry has been so good to me. It's given me everything that I have in my life. And just glad to be here. Glad to be chatting with you. First time we really got a chance to meet and chat. Been following you for a long time, and just a crazy story, man.
2 quick questions, if you don't mind. You had, if I'm not mistaken, you had 0 HVAC experience.
I had no experience in anything. In January of 2003, when I got out, by that time I was 39 years old. So my 23, I went in, I get out at 39. And I responded to an ad in the newspaper, in the sports section of our local newspaper, looking for a commissioned salesperson. And I always knew I could sell. When I was young, I did some sales, studied, Tom Hopkins and Brian Tracy and, Zig Ziglar, all the greats when I was in prison that last 7 years. I always knew sales was going to be my way out. I knew I wasn't getting a job at IBM, with my record. I knew I'd be in some type of small business in sales, because I knew I didn't need any special licensing, depending on the industry. And so I just studied and I just was good at it, man. Just great at building relationships and finding out what's going on with people, find out what their triggers are and get them to like me and let them know I like them, and everything works out.
If I'm not mistaken too, you didn't mention it, which is fine, because I don't want to give up everything. People got to get there's 3 books: Upside of Fear, Power of Consistency, and Consistency Selling. I recommend starting at the beginning, but I don't think it makes a difference either way. But you saved a guard's life, correct?
Yeah, that was a crazy thing too. It was almost like if you wrote a script about my life and you put that part in there, you'd say, no, this is bullshit. This isn't what happened. Right? This is too crazy. So it was actually in 2002. It was 6 years after my dad died, 6 years after I made the decision to change my life, and I had 1 year left in prison. So I was getting pretty excited. And one day I was in the cell house on the phone, and this cop walks past me, and he collapses. And at first I thought he tripped or something, but it turned out he passed out, was having some kind of seizure. And I remember looking at the dude. I hung the phone up. I was on the phone, and I hung the phone up, and I'm looking at this guy flopping around like a fish out of water. And, you're in the penitentiary, and, the cops are not your friends. Rule number one is don't talk to the cops too much. So everybody's kind of watching the guy. Nobody's really helping him. And I was kind of hit with that moment of like, okay, am I the real deal? Have I been bullshitting myself for 6 years and I'm changing? Because if I'm truly a man of honor and character and going to live a different, I got to help this guy, cop or no cop, right? Convict or no convict. So I knelt down over the guy, was trying to kind of get him to settle down. He was fighting himself and this seizure, whatever he's having. And just as I get my hands around his wrist, all of a sudden, like somebody turned the switch off, the guy just died. Like it was just unbelievable. And I'm like, holy crap, this guy just died right in front of me. And I start thinking, I got to help him. I got to help him. So, I got to do CPR. I didn't know the first thing about CPR. I tell people the only thing I knew about CPR at that time was what I'd seen on Baywatch, right? On slow motion. So I start pumping the guy's chest. Nothing happens. I pump on the chest. And then I realize if I'm going to help this cat, I got to put this mouth on that mouth and put some oxygen into his bloodstream. And so I put my mouth on his. I could taste the Dr. Pepper he was drinking when he fell down. It was all I could do not to gag on the guy. But I breathed and I breathed again, but nothing happened. This went on for about 2 or 3 minutes. I learned later that just the time, the time warp I was in for those few minutes. And about 3 minutes in, a bunch of cops bum rushed the cell house. Somebody had finally run to get some help. And a cop comes running around. They're locking down the cell house. And one cop comes around and kneels down next to me. He told me later he knew I was trying to help the cop. I don't know how he knew that, but he just, but he kneels down. He knew how to do CPR. So he tells me you got to pinch the nose and tilt the head back. He figured I already had the Dr. Pepper in my mouth, so I might as well do the mouth to mouth. But he knew all the ratios. So he starts doing the chest compressions, tells me when to breathe. A couple of minutes go by, this guy comes back to life. Just like as fast as a light went off, this dude wakes up, and he wakes up in the exact instant that my mouth is squarely on his. And he sees me out of the corner of his eye. I see him in the corner of my eye. All this cop sees is prison green. Yeah. He didn't know what was going on. So he just starts swinging at me, right? He saw a convict over him. He starts swinging, and I start scrambling out of the way. Cops move in. He sees all the blue. He calms down, and dude makes a full recovery. He had some kind of reaction to some medication he was on. And about 2 weeks later, I get this letter from the prison warden thanking me for what I had done. And in that letter, he told me that I had proved myself to be a man of honor and character. And I remember reading that letter that a prison warden, after my life that I had led up to that point, was 38 years old at that point, a year away from getting out, that I had proven myself to be a man of honor and character. And I got to tell you, Joe, like that was a green light for me. That was confirmation, like, okay, I'm on the right path here, that a prison warden would tell me that. And a year later I got out and got my job and start building my dream,
I'm just curious. Have you ever come across the gentleman ever again?
Not him. I've done a lot of work in the prison system, and one of the wardens I did some work for tracked him down one time. He had left Department of Corrections and had moved on to whatever else. So I never actually got a chance to speak with him. It is interesting. About a month after that happened, I went to see the parole board. I had a year left, but they had the opportunity to release me then. And my case manager had convinced me to go to the parole board. I'd been rejected for parole several times, was kind of done with it. I was going to kill my number, as they call it. Just in a year, they had to let me out in a year. But he convinced me to go see the parole board. And I went in, and this guy and his wife came in and spoke on my behalf to the parole board that this convict saved my life, And of course, they still didn't give me parole. But I went back and finished my last year. And but that was the only time I had an interaction with him. When he came back to work a couple of weeks later, like it was not a good situation. I was under a lot of negative attention for helping a cop. Fortunately, at that time, this was in 2002. In the penitentiary system, your number is your credibility. And I had a number from 1987, so I was kind of OG on the yard. So that gave me a lot of cred, and I didn't get as much stuff, but he was getting pressure from the cops too. I mean, having a convict save your life is kind of like your wife taking up for you in a bar fight. It's not very cool.
Yeah.
So we kind of avoided each other, honestly. When he came back to work, I saw him at the parole board, and then of course I got out a year later and just kind of moved on from there.
And you mentioned though you have done a lot with the prison system. I was going to
Yeah.
kind of ask. Obviously, I didn't know if that was part of like any of your other companies is trying to help people that are convicted felons get back on their feet, whether it's in any of your companies or other companies.
Yeah, no, I do a lot of work in that. I've never monetized it and made a business out of it. It's always been part of, kind of the paying it forward type of thing. When I got out of the joint the last time, there was this captain there that had helped me a lot over the years, getting me access to books and things I was studying, different things. And he told me when I was walking out, he goes, to whom much is given, much is required. And his name was Ed Gillantine. We call him Gil. And I said, Gil, I said, I really don't have anything. He goes, yeah, but you will. And you got to remember, too much is given, much is required. So I've never been able to say no to a prison invitation. I do a lot of that stuff. It slowed down a lot in COVID, and it's just now kind of starting to pick up again. In fact, I just got an invitation to speak at the federal penitentiary down in Florence, Colorado, where I did the second half of the 90s. It's crazy. I've been back in a lot of the same prisons where I served time.
How if you, and we'll jump into selling, but this just intrigues me. How is it when you return?
For the most part, it's been positive. For the most part, it's been really, really positive. My goal when I go in there is just to give the guys hope, because, when I know that in Shawshank Redemption, Red said that hope is a dangerous thing. I love that movie, one of my favorites for obvious reasons, but I think hope is not a dangerous thing. I think hope is what keeps us alive. Hope is what keeps us hanging on. And so when I go in, I show the guys, because I was in there for 13 years, had an old number, in quotes. The guys listened to me. It's not like I was in there for 6 months or a weekend for a DUI. Like I did robberies, kidnappings, money laundering. I mean, I had a bad record. So guys in there, they know that. And many of them by that point have read my first book, The Upside of Fear. So they kind of know the drill, and they really can't call bullshit. So they know I'm in there for one reason. It's not to make money. It's just to give them some hope and to give them a couple of tools that can help. But for the most part, the response has always been very, very positive.
Any negative response for you inside?
Not really. It's kind of interesting. I think you're kind of alluding towards this. Like, it's not necessarily cool with everybody in there that you made it, right? Because a lot of guys, mark you as a sellout, kind of thing. And yeah, I sold out. I sold out to success and family and love and Ferraris, if you want to know the truth.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it's been positive. I was surprised. And whenever I go in there, we do go in there with our head on a swivel, because there are some people that don't like what I've done. They think, I'm a sellout bitch or whatever.
Yeah.
And they can come at you with a pen or a pencil, very, very quickly. Right. It doesn't take long. And so we always caution, usually a staff with me. I usually take a guy or two. And of course there's security and police and guards there and stuff. But nothing like that's ever happened. Nothing negative has ever happened like that.
It's funny because I was just reading, the old, what do they call, crabs in a basket theory, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And it's crazy that it would happen even at that. It's everywhere. It's probably
so true.
Human nature.
Yeah. Yep. It's so true. I remember when I was a kid, I grew up in South Louisiana. We used to go crabbing, and like, I would see that, like, you'd have these, half a dozen crabs, and you start pulling up the cage, and that one is like, what the hell's going on here? This ain't right. We're flying through the air here, going up towards this bridge, and he's trying to get out.
Yeah.
And the other guys just try to pull him back down, man. They're not thrilled. I always tell guys when I'm in there, I tell people in general, like, when you start having a lot of success, whether it's building a successful company and selling for millions of dollars or walking out of the penitentiary, don't expect a ticker tape parade. And the shocking thing is, Joe, the negative vibe that comes from some people, sometimes it comes from very, very close places, like family and close friends, that are intimidated by your success. Yeah. And it's kind of crazy. I've always noticed that the people that are most successful are the least critical. When I was coming up and writing books, Tom Hopkins endorsed my book, Stephen Covey, Tony Robbins, different very successful people. And those are the people who were always trying to lift me up, right? They were always trying to help a guy out. It was the people who hadn't done anything. They're always the critics on the sidelines. They're not in the ring. They're not in the fight. And they sit out there, with the jibber jabber, trying to criticize. You see it so much. I'm sure you must see it so much in social media too. It's so crazy. But the people that are successful, the ones that are like, hey, come on, I remember in the yard, like, running, when I first started running, jogging, right? The guys that were out there running 50 miles a week were like, come on, man, you can do this. You can do this. The guys that were sitting up in the bleachers eating the Zuzus and Wham Whams are criticizing you. Oh, you're going to get Mr. Healthy in here. Next, you'll be reading the Bible. It's like the guys that are doing it were the ones who want to help you up. It's the ne'er-do-wells. It's the losers that are sitting back, chiming in. It's the exact same one on social media. I've never had a Leland Smith or a Kenny Bell or a Mary Jean Anderson criticize me. These are people that I aspired to be, that I worked with and helping them build their companies, and they're always pulling you up. It's the guy up here with a shitty company doing $500,000 a year after 15 years that's got something smart to say. It's always that way.
Yeah. It's unfortunate. Last question and kind of around it, because you mentioned it. Obviously, aside from your books, you mentioned reading. What's your favorite book, or what do you typically most recommend when someone asks?
It kind of depends on what their challenges are. For me, the first book that I read in this journey was 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And that book, Dr. Covey and I became very close friends. He mentored me. He endorsed my books before he passed away. And that book didn't change my life. That book saved my life. But it set me on a path of doing a lot of reading over the course of the next, many, many years of my life. And I would say my favorite book is a little book called Man's Search for Meaning, written by a guy named Viktor Frankl, who was in the concentration camps in World War II. He's a Jewish psychiatrist. And the reason that book really rang true to me is he talks about in that book that when you find meaning and significance in your struggle, that's when you're on a true growth path, right? When you see the significance in your suffering. For many years, I did 13 years. The first half of that, I didn't see any purpose to it. It was just suffering. And I was very angry. I was very resentful. I was not a very good person, right? I fought tooth and nail. That book taught me, I read that book right after my father died. It was, in fact, probably the second book I read after 7 Habits, because Dr. Covey was a big fan of Viktor Frankl. And I remember reading that book, and I'm like, wow, I wonder if there's some significance in my struggle, and all this prison, the divorces, the financial struggle, all the incarceration, the poverty. And I didn't know what the significance would be, Joe, but I became convinced there was meaning to it. And when I realized there was meaning in my struggle, meaning and purpose in the difficulty, it became very easy to do time because I saw some purpose to it. And so I tell that to people all the time. We've all had divorces, the financial problems, the health problems. Everybody goes through life. You get your teeth kicked in from time to time. And when you just look at those things like a divorce or a business failure or a bankruptcy, if you look at that stuff just as pain, then it is pain, it's misery. But if you say, wow, there's some meaning and significance, right? What Napoleon Hill called the seed of equivalent benefit, right? When you see that in your struggle, then you can deal with it in a very calm, straightforward way, learn from it. And it can really be, as Napoleon Hill would also say, grist for your mill, right? To fuel your fire, to continue moving forward, to grow, to learn, to expand your horizons. So yeah, that was a powerful book for me.
It reminds me of, and I don't know if this would be right, but you can tell me, if you look at it as solely as pain, then you're looking at something that happened to you versus something that happens for you.
Yeah, no, that's a great way to look at it. It's a great phraseology there. I like that a lot. What can it do for you? Tony Robbins talks a lot about that. When something happens, some people will look at it and say, damn, that sucks. Whose fault is it? Why did that happen to me? Other people will say, what can I do to improve this situation? And whichever conversation you have in your head dictates what happens next, whether positive or negative. If you look at it and say, wow, how can I prevent this from happening again? A good friend of mine, a guy named Willie Jolly, one of the best speakers, probably the best speaker I've ever seen in my life, wrote a book that a setback is a setup for a comeback, and it really is. If you can look at these so-called failures, which I don't believe failure even exists unless you give up, because everything else is just a learning experience, right? It's that old Chinese proverb, right? Fall down 8 times, get up 9. Like, that's how simple. If you keep getting up, then there is no failure. It's just more learning. Now, if we give up, that could be failure. I tell people there's nothing wrong with falling down. We all make mistakes. We trip, we fall down. There's everything wrong with laying down, because that's giving up. And that's really the throwing in the towel that really is just the sure hallmark for misery coming.
You're hitting on a point that I try that flashes in my mind all the time. It's, the difference between reaction and responding.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
When you respond, when you take your time, you take a breath and you actually respond versus react, which is
That's so
usually,
good, dude.
you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
usually reacting, it's I don't know the science behind it, but it's like one of the things that we have as one of our cognitive factors that allows us to respond versus like an animal who they're like, that dog's never bit anybody, but it
Right.
just something triggered it because they don't have that
They don't have that
mental
ability. You're,
yeah.
you're exactly right. That really gets down to the essence of habit one in the 7 habits. Be proactive. Covey talks about that a proactive person, well, let's say a reactive person first is like taking a can of soda, shaking it up and popping the top, right? That's reactive. Proactive is shake up a bottle of water and open it. Nothing happens.
Yeah.
And when you understand that as human beings, we have that unique ability as humans to pause and respond that the dog doesn't have. You step on a dog's tail, he bites you, right? He doesn't stop and think about whether or not you did it on purpose or not. It's just an instinctive reaction. Human beings are blessed with this ability to pause and analyze why something happened. And that little moment of time between, stimulus and response, as Covey would say, is the freedom to choose, right? It is the essence of responsibility. If you take the word responsibility and flip it around, as Covey did, the ability to respond. That's what happens in that little moment of freedom. And that's just what separates humans from the animals. And the better you get at using that freedom to choose, the more success you find. Right. So that's a powerful point. Good stuff.
I think it's a great tie into, you mentioned the pause. I think we could tie it right into sales training.
Oh,
How
yeah.
many times in say a closing situation, which I want to talk about, because I love how you change closing to conclusion, but we'll get to that in a second. But we'll keep the original words in a closing situation, and the customer, replies with some kind of objection, stall, whatever, and we see the sales rep kind of forget that first pause and reacts.
Absolutely. It's funny. I had an hour and a half sales meeting with my sales team here at this HVAC company here in town. And one of the biggest mistakes that we can make is to think we have to have the quick comeback, right? There's nothing wrong with a homeowner raising an objection and sitting back and saying, that's really a good point, Mr. Homeowner. Let me think about that for a second. Or I've been in situations where I'm wrestling with the bear at the closing and we've kind of gone in circles for a few minutes and I'm not sure where to go. Like, extract yourself in the situation. You know what, Mr. Homeowner, I got to check something on your furnace. Go back up in the attic, take a deep breath, breathe in a bag, stop hyperventilating and think about your strategy. You don't have to have the quick comeback every single time. You can pause and respond. Literally I have walked out of away from the kitchen table to go somewhere in the house by the equipment to think about, okay, what's going on here? How the hell am I going to proceed? You don't always have to have the quick comeback. Give yourself the benefit of that pause, as you mentioned, and then respond appropriately.
Love it. One of my favorite quotes in your, there's a ton, and you'll know exactly what I mean here. And I'll just read it because I don't want to botch it, but I love this because it kind of talks about both sides of it, but you'll get it in a second. If you want to temporarily change your sales results, focus on your actions. If you want to permanently change your sales results, focus on your thoughts.
Yeah. That really is the core of the power of consistency, right?
Did you mic drop when you wrote that years ago? Did you?
It's funny, dude. When I write, it's a very, very surreal experience. I isolate myself from everybody, including family. And I go somewhere. I've written all 3 of my books are written in Maui. And I'll go out there for 4, 5, 6 weeks, whatever the writing period is going to be. I set a number of words that I have to write every day. Typically it's 2,000. And because of the time change, I tend to get up very, very early, 3 or 4 in the morning, Hawaii time, and start writing. And the deal I've cut with myself is no golf, no beach, no fun, no nothing until 2,000 words are on there. Some days I'll go back and read those 2,000 words and I'm like, damn, that was good. Other days I'm like, that made no sense. That was so trash. But I always get those 2,000 words. It never occurs to me when I'm writing it that it's good or bad. It's just getting it on paper, right? And then it's going back and reading it. And sometimes like, damn, that's some good shit. I've had people come to me with quotes of mine. I'm like, damn, that's really good. They're like, it came from your book, but after 15 years of writing books, you forget every little thing that you wrote. But that is such an important one because it goes to the basic neuroscience of what happens up here. When we make a decision, when we have a thought, right? This is a very powerful electromagnetic field up here. When you have a thought, any thought, it sends an electrical impulse to a part of your brain called the hypothalamus, which secretes the chemical that triggers the corresponding emotion. Your emotions, your thoughts are inextricably tied inside your brain. It's a chemical reaction. So if I have a very happy thought, a warm and loving thought, my brain starts producing dopamine and endorphins. And what happens is I feel happy now. I think happy, I think lovingly, now I feel loving, I feel happy, right? It's a chemical reaction. If I get angry or scared, mad, my brain starts producing adrenaline and epinephrine. I feel angry. I feel scared, right? So we have to understand these emotions we have don't happen in a vacuum. They're just a chemical reaction to the thought. Then that emotion drives what? Drives the behavior, the response, right? And of course, the response, the actions produce the results. So when I say that, what I mean is if you focus just on your behavior, you can like short-term white knuckle it and force yourself to change your behavior short-term. But eventually everything comes back to the emotions that are driving those behaviors and the thoughts that are driving the emotions. And that's why I say, if you want temporary change, just focus on what you're doing. You can white knuckle it and force yourself to go to the gym for a couple of weeks, right? But if you want to permanently go to the gym, you got to go back to the emotions and the thoughts that are fueling those emotions to have permanent change, right? That's why the thoughts are the foundation of all of it. The behaviors are simply a reaction to the neuroscience that's happening inside of our brains and the chemicals that are, part of that process.
Yeah, I don't know when it was founded, what year, but plasticity is one of those things where it's like, it's like the eighth wonder of the world now that we realize
that
you can rewire.
You're 100% right. Listen, neuroscientists say that 30,000 times a day we make a decision or a choice. 30,000 times a day, most of it at the subconscious level, right? And what happens in your brain, you have this very complex system of neural pathways. And the analogy I use is like a highway system. Go to LA or Chicago, a big city. They have this complex system of highway systems, right? Overpasses, underpasses, off ramps, on ramps, bridges, tunnels, all this stuff. But those roads go to the same place every single day. So if I'm in LA and I want to go to San Francisco, if I follow the roads that go to San Francisco, barring an accident or my car breaking down, I'm going to get to San Francisco every single time. I'm never going to accidentally end up in Las Vegas, right? Because those roads go to a particular destination every single time. And the cars on those roads get to that very predictable destination. Well, inside your brain, you've got a similar system, but instead of highways, they're called neural pathways. And instead of cars on those neural pathways, you have thoughts. You have thoughts running down these neural pathways every single day. And for the most part, we think the same shit every single day. We think the same thing about money, our spouse, about our customers, about food, about everything. We have the same thoughts. Where those thoughts going down those neural pathways get you to a very predictable destination, exactly where you are today. It's just, you've just been driving down these highways to get you exactly where you are. So here's the thing. If I want to go somewhere else, if I want to go to a new income, a better relationship, right? Better health, what's the likelihood if I keep following my existing thoughts, I'm going to get there? My existing thoughts got me where I am.
Yeah.
Right? Einstein had this famous quote that you cannot fix a problem at the same level of thinking that created the problem, right? So if I want to have a different destination, a different outcome, I got to follow different highways. I got to follow a new pattern of thought. That's what the power of consistency is all about. That entire book is about how do you change those neural pathways, because you can change them. It's very simple, actually, but you can change the neural pathways and create a new set of highways to a new destination. That's the key to getting there.
The two things on this that I think are important, and you can talk about it, I just want to bring it up, but it's like, there's your proof on why practice is critical. Like, you can't just do it once and, expect that it's both quality and quantity are required.
Yep.
But, every time I say practice, I just think of Allen Iverson. Practice.
Talking about practice.
Right? And then you look at where the career unfortunately ended when it could have been. But anyway,
Yeah.
I digress. And then the other side of it is, I was reading the other day, and this isn't to be negative, but the longer you go, meaning age wise, the harder it is
Yeah.
to rewire. So then that's what made me, I love analogies because I'm not very bright. So I try to think, and I was thinking, okay, think of it as concrete. And the older you get, the more
Yeah.
hardened it is, right? In the
It
beginning,
gets
when you
back to
put
that plasticity you talked about,
yeah,
right? The younger we are, the softer the brain is, the more quickly neural pathways can grow. That's why children can learn things so quickly. That's why you take a kid that lives in a home with two languages being spoken, that kid will learn both languages effortlessly. They don't have to practice, right? Because the brain is so soft, the pathways grow very quickly. As we age, our brain hardens. It's a natural part of the process of aging. That's why we call old people hard-headed. It's a perfect metaphor because the brain
wow,
hardens, right?
yeah,
And as we get older, it becomes harder to teach an old dog new tricks, doesn't it? I mean, try learning a new language. Try learning Russian when you're 50 versus I've got a buddy of mine whose wife is Russian. Their little girl speaks English and Russian fluently. She can write and communicate in both languages. She never had to really sit down and try to study it, right? She just picked up both up. But as we age, the good news is that the average human can change the neural pathways, takes about 30 days, right? It's a process of repetition and high emotion. It's the same strategy they used to brainwash people in war. And the North Vietnamese were very successful at brainwashing American prisoners. So much so that within a couple of months, they could have them talking negatively and rejecting their own country because they would put them in a very high emotional state, starve them, deprive them of sleep, loud music, whatever they could to get them very agitated, very high emotional state, and then repetition. They start repeating a message, right? Kind of the old Chinese, water drop, consistency, the same message. After a while, the brain starts to respond. There's a very famous study that NASA did back in the 50s where they had these astronauts in this spaceship, right? They were on Earth, though. They were not in a zero gravity chamber. They were on Earth in this mock-up spacecraft, but they put goggles on them to invert their vision 180 degrees so they could learn to operate the spacecraft and whatever. After 25 days, and they had to live in this thing, right? 24/7 for weeks. After 25 days, one of the astronauts goes to the researchers through their communication devices. Hey, my vision has corrected itself. Within 4 or 5 days, every astronaut in the study had the same phenomenon. Their vision corrected itself. And they learned that it took the brain about 30 days, 25 to 30 days to grow a new neural pathway because the body knew where gravity was. It just took the brain 30 days to figure out the vision. They take the goggles off, everything's upside down again, right? So what they learned is that it takes the brain about 30 days. That's why we've been told our entire lives takes about how long for a habit to develop, a new habit? About 30 days, because that's how long it takes the brain to catch up and to grow the new neural pathway.
Yeah, you talk about, do you do that in your ritual in the morning?
That's exactly what the quiet time ritual is. That's exactly what it's designed for. Basically, I'm brainwashing myself in a positive way to start believing some shit. Wayne Dyer used to say, people always talk about, oh, I'll believe it when I see it. Actually, it's just the opposite. You'll see it after you believe it, right? You got to come to believe.
Yeah, and that goes down the path of growth and fixed mindset, but it's like, man, and in our industry, it's a performance-based industry. The selling side is, right. And it's like getting people to realize there's that 4-minute mile, or there's that, there's more in the tank.
Yeah. Yeah.
If, versus just, again, what happens to you versus what happens for you.
Yeah.
That's the, I wanted to talk to you real quick a little bit about the fear process, because I like that a lot. I like acronyms again. Just things that help me remember stuff is
I'm the same way.
helpful. But you put in there, and I can't remember it, and I just wrote it down in a quick note. But you wrote fear, and then you kind of had a dash emotional commitment.
Yeah, yeah.
Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, fear is an acronym for focus, emotional commitment, action, responsibility. And it's really the process I teach in The Power of Consistency, right? To change our thinking permanently. Once we reach the point to, well, wow, my thoughts are having a huge impact on my life, maybe I got to start changing how I think, right? As I tell people, you got to think about what you think about before you think about it, right? Think about it. Yeah. So focus is to get clarity on two things. What do I want? What do I have to do, right? James Allen said that dispersion is weakness. Concentration is power. That's such a powerful 6 words. I have that book on my desk. Actually, it's at my office right now. But like it's 6 words. Constant dispersion is weakness. Concentration is power. Like, holy cow, dispersion is that's scatterbrain thinking, right? It's weakness. Concentration, focus, that's power, right? It's the ultimate equalizer. I got 103 IQ. I've had it tested 3 times. God, I couldn't believe how shitty it was. It's 103 IQ. It's very low. But focus, dude. Like I will focus on something, on building a business, on writing a book, on working on a keynote. I will focus to the exclusion of everything else. And that's very, very, very powerful. So focus in the first step is about getting clarity on what you want and what do you need to do to get there. 2 or 3 things, not 100 things. What 2 or 3 things, if I did every single day, would get me where I want to go? There's usually just 2 or 3. If you think about it, in sales, it's run every call with passion and purpose, diagnose problems, recommend solutions like a boss, and ask for the damn order. If you do those 3 things on every service call, every sales call, you will be a top producer. The question is, am I going to do those 3 things, right? That's where the emotional commitment comes in. That's where you write it down, engage in the quiet time ritual, as you talked about earlier, which is visualizing on that list for 10 to 15 minutes every day, changing the neural pathways, right? And then action, consistent action, right? You know, if he, as Will Rogers once said, even if you're on that right path in life, you'll get run over if you just sit there. You have to take consistent action. And then, of course, you have to accept responsibility for your behaviors or results, et cetera. But that simple little 4-step process is the centerpiece of the power of consistency. And I will tell you this, Joe, when that book came out, I want to say about 2011, 2012, it hit number 5 on New York Times and number 2 on the Wall Street Journal bestsellers list. I get a call from a guy named Ed Nottingham, who's an actual neuroscientist, right? An actual guy. And he worked at FedEx and he taught this stuff in FedEx leadership. Dude calls me up and says, Mr. Long, I got to tell you, this process is the simplest explanation of the neuroscience behind decision-making and the principles that are the underpinnings of rationally motive behavior therapy I've ever read in my life. And I'm like, there's a name for this shit? I mean, it's like, it's common sense. And that, by the way, is how FedEx became a client of mine. And in their purple pipeline, which is their leadership development, the first thing they do is go through the power of consistency. And we built a program for them to take their leadership through that whole program. It's the first lesson they go through in a 2-year development program that FedEx has.
I now when you said his name, I'm like, hold on. And I remember I read his book because you told me about it. It's not as bad as it seems.
Not as bad as it seems. Yep.
Right. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. I thought that was, I remember you mentioning it in the book and I was like, I just wrote it down. Just like I wrote down William Jolly. I got to see this guy who.
Oh man, he's so good. He's formerly a jazz singer, right? He was a jazz singer in Washington, D.C. who somehow fell into speaking and writing. And he sings during his keynote presentation. He closes, or used to close very often, with Somewhere Over the Rainbow. He has a magnificent voice. And it's after you listen to him for an hour and he sings that song, it'll give you chills, man.
Meanwhile, people like you and me show up in pink blazers, right? I'm just kidding. I love it.
Hey, no, my wife gets credit or blame for the blazers, but I'm actually, so last year I was the MC at Epic, which is EGIA's annual event. I got to interview Deion Sanders for an hour, which was incredible.
Oh, that's right.
It was just a fascinating human being. This year, EGIA's Epic event is going to be in Florida at the Disney Yacht Club, and I'm going to be interviewing Michael Strahan, which will be another exciting interview. When you study these top performers in their field, they can distill the essence of their success down into a handful of principles, and you can learn so much from them through their 30 or 40 or 50 years of experience. They'll distill it down to some basic nuggets. And so it's been a real privilege to get to meet some of those people, and the people I've worked with. It's just mind boggling from where, when you think about where I came from.
That's a kind of, you probably weren't, yes, you had an objective, a goal, especially once you got out of prison, was probably just at first to survive and make it. Yeah. But then to be where you are now,
it's crazy, dude.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It's crazy.
That's man, crazy is right. So from what do you, when you work with, say, your sales team, with your business there in Colorado now, or you speak with them, do you kind of 50-50 split, like talk actual tangible sales skills and training, or Mindset, where do you like to?
You're exactly right, Joe. It's 50-50. I had an hour and a half meeting this morning. Every shoulder season, and I encourage everyone to do this, you have to take your service techs and your sales team and put them through your core training, whatever training you're using. It doesn't have to be mine. It doesn't matter. It could be Joe Crisara's. They could be Jason Walker's, EGIA. It's all great stuff, right? But there's a process to running a service call properly and running a sales call. What happens in the summer is that everything goes to hell in a handbasket because the weather's driving our sales. You know, we averaged about 300 leads per month in the summer, right? So you can get by with a low close rate as long as you have a high average ticket because there's so much work. You can't screw it up. Try that shit in September, October. Yeah. So in Colorado Springs here, our September, we've already had our first rainstorm, cool weather behind it, 60s and 70s behind it. We're in full-blown shoulder season. So every shoulder season, I did it last week with my service techs, this week with my sales guys. We go over the fundamentals. What are your expectations? What's your mindset? What are you visualizing? And then we go on the process too, because everybody starts cutting corners in the summer, but you can't do that in the shoulder season. So every September, I put my entire crew through the core training, and I've actually got 4 companies. Gary Alex and I have just acquired 3 other companies recently, working on a couple more. We build them up, we sell them, we do our thing. But you got to put, and I do it every spring also, by the way, before summer, we go over it again because it is that constant repetition. And every time I have guys that went through my program this morning, we talked about it for an hour and a half, that have been through it 4 or 5 seasons. And they're like, damn, I forgot that, right? Yeah. I tell sales managers, owners, leadership, when the day comes, because I know we all get frustrated, we got to have the same conversations with our technicians, with our installers, with our salespeople. Let me tell you something. When the day comes that you can tell somebody something one time and they do it properly forevermore, that's the day I don't need managers. I don't need leaders because I could just tell people once, but that's not reality. It is a constant case of repetition, because we're human beings and we forget. You got to remind people.
Yeah, no, that's, it's a great, I mean, you figure like guys, that's the bad example. People may not like it, but you got to qualify every year in the military for your pistol. You got to qualify every year in the military, like no matter what. And, people I think get flustered. I know I don't like to ever equate the military to like what we do in terms of life and death, because it's definitely not, but it's a similar concept in being able to execute, at a high level.
I agree. We can't compare a sales career or contracting career to the sacrifice military guys make, but there are some analogies and we can learn from them. And that requalifying is a great analogy and a great thing for us to keep in mind.
Yeah. There's 2 sources of kind of content that I really like, just because typically it can be validated, the military and usually like some type of high performing, athlete and or like a coach.
Yeah.
Because you can't really.
There's so many sports analogies. One of my favorites, I grew up in South Louisiana, so we're huge New Orleans Saints fans. I've been in Colorado for 30 some odd years and I love the Broncos, but the Saints are my team, right? I bleed black and gold. And Drew Brees, I remember one time, he brought respectability to the Saints for 15 years, including a Super Bowl championship. And he talked about it so often about process versus result. And we talk about it so much in sales. Process is what you do. Result is what happens. And you have 0 control over the result. You have 100% control over the process. And so he would talk about on their plays, they have a process they have to execute on. Sometimes it works. Sometimes the result is great. Sometimes the result is bad. But you have to execute on your process every single play. It's the same thing in sales. I was talking to my team this morning, reminding them, I went on a lead a couple of months ago with one of my guys. We get to the house, wonderful old man, retired Air Force, had already talked to 2 companies. We're the 3rd, and we're down in the mechanical room. He's got 2 systems in the house, and he says, man, I cannot wait to get my new system, brand X, installed, right? We don't sell brand X. I don't know how he got us confused. He had talked to 2 other dealers that sold brand X. I'm leaving the brand out of it. And then we were the 3rd company in, but we sold brand Y, right? So I don't know how we got in the house, but he tells us this within 10 minutes of walking in the house. He can't wait to get his new brand X system because this one has worked so well for him for 25 years. That's so many people in that situation would say, oh, well, he's not buying from me because we sell brand Y. And I guess I might as well just short circuit my process and say, hey, sir, we don't sell brand X. I don't know how you got us confused with a dealer that sells brand X. But I was running that call. I'm like, I don't give a shit what he just said. I got work to do. My job is to change his mind. I spend the next 2 hours. A big part of my process is explaining to homeowners why brand doesn't really matter. It's all about the contractor, right? 2 hours later, we signed a deal for $26,000 for brand Y that we sell. Brand X never came up again. But so many guys would have decided, oh, he wants such and such brand. We don't sell that. And would just kind of give up on the process. You have to stay true to the process. Extend yourself emotionally and professionally to your homeowners. Do what your competition won't do without knowing whether or not you're going to get the deal. You got to extend yourself and serve people, right? Tolstoy said that service is the true meaning of life. 60 years old, I believe it more and more every single year.
Yeah, so I always, as I mentioned to you before we jumped on, I two things real quick. I always take all your content and use it because, again, one, it's a different voice. Two, I just align with it. But you talk about all, and you already said it here today, it's run every call with passion and purpose. And I took it one more, passion, purpose, and on process, because that's all you can control.
Exactly right.
I was trying to pull up my sweatshirt because I have my process over outcome.
Oh, I thought you were just getting hot in your hoodie there.
Yeah, no. You're like, what is this guy doing? He's nuts. No,
hey, I'm thinking it's his freaking show. I mean, who am I?
Yeah, hey, whatever gets by. I'm a huge, not necessarily any of the teams he coached. I'm just a big Nick Saban fan, and he breaks it down so simple, and it's not easy. But he's like, you have a vision, you know that you have a process. The hardest step is 3, and it's the discipline to follow that process.
Execute
every day, regardless of how you feel, what you're, and it's.
I write that in the introduction to The Power of Consistency. Success is not a knowledge problem. It's an implementation, execution problem. Look, with today's access, we have the information. You can become a brain surgeon on YouTube if you wanted to. Like, you can learn anything these days. We have access to information like never, ever in the history of humankind. Success is not a knowledge problem. It is strictly a doing it, implementation, execution problem. Some people do it, some people don't. There's nothing I've done the last 20 some odd years that anybody else couldn't have done. I don't have some spectacular intellect. I don't have some magical money pool that I can, I came from nothing, and it is all just focus, hard work, learning, and executing.
It reminds me of when you, basically the 5 kind of, I guess I don't know if it's anything, but basically the five words that prevent everybody from getting what they want. I don't feel like it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's what it comes down to. Why didn't you do that?
Or some limiting belief when they were young, like I don't deserve it. I'm too fat. I'm too short. I'm too tall. I'm too skinny. I'm too black. I'm too white. Why can't I be like my brother and my sister? Right? All that shit that we hear when we're young, that goes in the box, as I call it, junk in the trunk, and they become limiting beliefs that can be driving your behavior 30, 40 years later. And that's a big one. I can't. It's not worth it. It won't work out for me. Because somebody else put something in here 30 years ago that, by the way, was completely wrong, but we still believe it today, because limiting beliefs are the biggest threat to success on the planet. They're ideas in your head that are wrong, but they've been there so long you think it's actual, the capital T truth, and it's not. That's a big part of the power of consistency, examining all the BS we learned when we were young through people who maybe had a different vision for their life than we have for ours. And that could be parents, grandparents, siblings, friends, whatever,
Perception is a tricky filter that everybody's life goes through. Quick questions before we jump off, because you've given me a ton of your time, and I can't.
It's my pleasure, Joe. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you enough, and we just scratched the surface. I tell you, I don't know how you feel, but I could ask you questions and talk with you all day. Real quick, what do you? Because you get to talk with salespeople, and that's the majority of our group. Obviously, there's owners and all that, and leaders too, but. What do you see as the biggest, you onboard a new salesperson who, truly a rookie, if you will, no experience, right? What do you see as the biggest inhibitor to their success? Or really any salesperson? What do you think takes them out of the game?
This will not surprise you, because you already know this. It's their mindset. It's the belief that they can be wealthy, they can be successful, that people will trust them, people will buy from them. It is their limiting beliefs. The process is the process. They can learn that. Anybody can learn my process, anybody else's process, right? It's the belief that I deserve it. Let me give you a quick example. When I was a kid, my dad used to tell me rich people are crooks, right? My father instilled that. And when you're 10 years old, and your dad tells you something, that's gospel. You don't second guess it. Like, oh, rich people are crooks. My grandfather, when we would have a big meal, he would have everybody hold hands. He would say a blessing, and he would say, look how good the po folk are eating tonight. Like, my entire family defined ourselves as the poor folk, right? That's true for most every American, because we're all 2 or 3 generations removed from somebody who lived through the Great Depression. And the Great Depression, nobody had money except for the select few. We had a name for them, robber barons. We looked at wealth as a very, very negative perspective, and that it wasn't something that we could have. Unfortunately, that has gone from generation to generation to generation now. And many people walking the planet today still think that's not for us. Rich people are crooks. You know, it's these limiting beliefs that hold us back. I'll give you another one, Joe. Next time you're in a group of your salespeople, you may have already done this. Ask them to get a pen and a piece of paper and write down the first 2 or 3 words that come to mind when you say the word salesman. And I'm telling you, 2/3 of them will write down a negative word. They'll have negative beliefs about sales. Now, how in the hell am I going to become a top performer in sales when fundamentally I think sales is snake oil, high pressure, whatever, right? We got to look at our core beliefs about sales, about wealth, about money, because that's going to determine what we do and how much effort we put into doing it. I was doing an event up in the Northeast years ago, 50 salespeople. It wasn't an HVAC company. It was a different kind of services, 50 salespeople. And I did that exercise. I see this lady in the back row scribbling like for 2 or 3 minutes. I'm like, ma'am, what are you writing down back there? Lazy, irresponsible, pressure, snake oil, all these negative words about salespeople. I'm like, wow. I said, what do you do here, by the way? She was the VP of sales. Can you imagine, Joe, being the VP of sales, someone in your position, and having those kind of negative beliefs about salespeople? You have to make sure that your core beliefs, remember, you're going to reach in here 30,000 times a day and make choices. You have to make sure that whatever you're reaching in and grabbing is something you put in there this morning, not something your dad put in there 30 years ago. It's a game changer.
It's funny. I don't do it that way, but I have said to our team and others, like, Google the word salesperson and look at the images.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Not only does that let you know, like, there's a good chance that maybe some of your salespeople have those in your head, like you're talking about, but that's also, I think, could be wrong. Like, have to understand and expect that's what your customer's thinking too.
Yeah, you're right. And we got to fight that. We got to fight that impression every day.
That's, man, we could go on forever. I don't want to take any more of your time, and I greatly appreciate it.
My pleasure, Joe.
I look forward to getting out to Colorado and seeing you soon in person, if that's okay.
Yeah, love to have you out, man.
I got to be honest, because I got to see the "It's Up to You" license plate. I love it.
That's on that was on a Ferrari F8. I actually just sold that F8. I'm getting another one, but those plates will go back on it.
I love it. That's the name of one of your companies too, isn't it?
Let's say my media company. It's Up to You Media. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know years ago how low that car was, but I saw that license plate and I was like, oh,
yeah.
I love it.
No, yeah. It's Up to You. Another one I have is Big Dreamer on my G-Wagon. And then I had a 62 Corvette, and I can't even think what it's been in the shop for a year. I'm having it redone. But it's anyway, I love the little fun stuff on the license plates. My wife hates it.
Before we jump off, I put in weldonlong.com. Is that the best way for anybody to come find you?
Yeah. If you got folks out there that need some help, or just go to the website. Oh, one of the things we do, Joe, I'm glad you mentioned that. And you go to the website, you'll see a pop-up. I do a training every single morning for 3 to 5 minutes that will come directly to your cell phone. And you can get a free trial of that. When you pop up, you put your phone number in there every morning. On Mondays, it's actually about 20 to 30 minutes. It's more like a sales training. But on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, I release a 3 to 5 minute video that's a daily reminder. Ask for the order, build the relationship every single day. You can get a free trial to it.
Man, I hope everybody gets to this part to hear that.
Yeah, just go to weldonlong.com. You can sign up.
I'm a big fan of the blog too. I want to say that on your site. So
appreciate it.
For anybody that checks out weldonlong.com, I mean, the content there alone, I mean, leaders who need content for their teams, and then just, as you mentioned earlier, there's no shortage of information for anyone to have an excuse as to why they don't know how to do it or can't do it. So, Weldon, thank you so much.
Thank you, Joe. It's been a pleasure, buddy.
All right.
Great to see you. See you soon.